So November 2nd, night before the election here in the U.S., we're going to have General Stanley McChrystal joining us, which should be a good one to talk about leadership. Seems like a kind of an appropriate time to talk about leadership from a leader in the country.
Perfect timing to get that topic. I like it. Good job.
Yeah, it worked out well. And then we've got an ex-candidate from the Democratic race. I'm not going to tell you who just yet, but that's coming up in January.
Last name begins with B, I'd say, because there were more B's than any other last. So I'm going to guess it was a B. I've got a good idea because I think I know on that. All right, that's good, but let's not spoil the fun. We are 9:15 London, 3:15 Central. Matt, we're going to say goodbye to you. How do I get rid of you, or do you get rid of yourself?
I'll take care of it. I'll demote myself. Thank you.
I love it. I love you can do it for me.
Best of luck.
Yeah. Cherie Blair, good evening.
Thanks good evening, Mike. How are you?
I'm terrific, thank you. Happy Thursday. I lose track of the days now we're in COVID. Every day seems to merge into be the same.
Isn't it Friday?
It is Friday.
Yeah.
It is Friday, which is strange because it was my birthday yesterday, which threw me, and
it was my birthday the day before.
You're another year older, same as me. A year older, a year wiser, as they say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we wanted to talk today, thanks for being with us, we wanted to talk about women, entrepreneurship, COVID, and we've got friends listening on the call that will want to ask some questions maybe. And I think everyone knows, but I'm thinking of Cherie Blair as, I've got down barrister, author, mother, founder of the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women, wife of Tony Blair, ex-Prime Minister. And I wanted to just start with one of my favorite stories when I kind of more have learned about you over the years. And if you don't mind, I'm going to prompt you, if you're good to share with us, about how as a young woman, you kind of thought of or dreamt of being Prime Minister. And I kind of love the thought of that story. Could you take us through that just a little bit?
Sure. Well, my story starts in Liverpool. And I was born in 1954, no secrets there. And I came from an ordinary working class family. My father, however, was an actor. My mother was an actress, and that's how they met. Very young. She was only 20, he was 21. And very shortly afterwards, along came me. So they left me with my grandmother in Liverpool while they continued to go on tour. So I was brought up for the first 2 years of my life, really, as my grandmother's almost fourth child. And then my sister was born, and then my mum decided she had to give up being an actress, and she came to live with her mother-in-law because her own mother had died when she was 14. Her father was a miner, and she'd had to leave school to look after him and her 10-year-old brother. So we were all living in Liverpool, and then when I was 8, my father left my mother and abandoned us back in Liverpool. And this was a big event in my life, and
sure.
It did two things, I think. One, made me determined to make up to my mother and my grandmother for that big disappointment, and also made me realize that, you know, you really had to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, because my mum was left with 2 small kids, no qualifications, and she ended up working in a fish and chip shop in the docks, and then ultimately started to work in a big department store, and she ended her life as the manager of a travel agency. So I was lucky. In those days, there was an exam called the 11 Plus, and I passed the 11 Plus, and I went to the grammar school.
Yes.
There were only 3 of us from my class of 70 who passed that exam. And the grammar school opened up a lot of opportunities for me, but it also put a big barrier between me and the children who didn't go into that. And at 14, we were talking about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And though my father obviously was estranged from my mother, because we were living with his mother, we still saw him, and he was the apple of my grandma's eye, and he was very politically active. And I think that and my grandmother's radicalism had rubbed off on me. So I told everyone I was going to be the first woman prime minister. That sadly was in 1968, and of course in 1979, Margaret Thatcher did beat me to it. On the other hand, I did get to live in number 10 Downing Street, even if it was courtesy of my husband.
But isn't that wonderful that as a child we dream something and we think something, and then the manifestation of it may not have been exactly the same, but that's still quite a stretch to have come from thinking that at that age to this happening. So
I think so, particularly in my circumstances. Honestly, if the fairy godmother had said at my christening that I was going to live in number 10 Downing Street and be married to the Prime Minister, they would all fallen about laughing, because girls from my class and my background, that in 1954, that was not our future. And I was just very lucky to be able to ride a wave of change that happened not just in the UK, but across Western Europe, if you like, across the free world, where opportunities opened up for women.
Yes.
And because I'd managed to get this education, I was able to take advantage of those opportunities. And because of that, met my husband and made him Prime Minister.
See, perhaps you should get the credit for it anyway.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, nothing to do with him whatsoever.
Well, there's an interesting story there which I want to come to about how you and him met in college, and there was one spot. But just before I do, I mean, it sounds like you were surrounded by women as you were brought up, and do you think that had a big impact on the way that you've advocated for women through your life, and you've achieved your own greatness as a woman?
No, I think that is absolutely the case. My grandmother was a very strong woman. She was the hub of we had a large, I mean, she came from Irish stock. She was the hub of her large family. So I was the oldest of my generation, still am. I've just buried my uncle, who so that there aren't many of his generation left now. So I'm virtually the eldest of the family. And people came to my grandmother, both neighbors and family members, with problems, and somehow or other, Vera would always sort them out. And my mum was also a very talented woman, but neither of them, of course, had the education that I had. They left school, both of them, at 14. So who knows what they might have achieved if they'd had the opportunities I had, but they were absolutely determined that my sister and I should get those opportunities, and made huge sacrifices to ensure that we did. They were also big supporters of other women, and in particular, there was one woman from Liverpool who became a role model for me, and she was called Rose Halbrom. And Rose was a Jewish girl from Liverpool, and she became, in 1949, the very first woman to become a Queen's Counsel, something which in 1995 I became one myself. So I was only the 75th woman to become Queen's Counsel from Rose Halbrom, whereas there were thousands of men between 1945 and 1995. And Rose she was the first woman Queen's Counsel. She was the first woman to defend someone in a death penalty, a murder case. She was a very proud daughter of Liverpool, and my grandma was a great admirer of her. Used to, like in those days when less TV and internet and things, she would often go and listen to her speak in court. And she used to talk about her, and I don't know, for some mad reason, I thought if one girl from Liverpool can make it in the law, maybe this girl from Liverpool could too.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you did. So things must have changed a lot over the past, let's say, 30, 40 years in terms of, women being at the forefront of things. And I want to think to like events in the US this week with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the second
woman on the Supreme Court. And funny enough, just today, somebody sent me something on YouTube, and which I quickly watched, and then it happened to go on to her lying in state.
Yes.
And I just caught that ceremony, and I caught some of the singing and the tribute by the rabbi, and I was lucky. Actually, I met her a few times. First time I met her was when I was on an official visit with my husband to the United States, and I got a chance to go to the Supreme Court and sit and have lunch with the Supreme Court justices and stand at the bar, which for me as an advocate myself was an amazing experience. And of course, she was one of them. And then she also occasionally came over to the UK to speak, and I met her there. And I was very moved by the tribute to her and all she had done and all she'd achieved as a woman. And we, remember she was in that first group of 9 women who got into Harvard.
Yes.
And who were asked by the professor to justify why they were taking a man's place.
Yes.
And that attitude of male entitlement and women somehow taking something away from men hasn't gone away in plenty of places in the world. And there are still many places in the world where women, have to be so much better to men to even get a chance. And, I know that people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, exceptional women, and indeed exceptional men, will always get to the top somehow. Margaret Thatcher, another exceptional woman. But, what I'd like to see is the opportunity for the just good enough women to get the opportunities that the just good enough men take for granted.
Yes. And I think that's, we'll talk a little bit about that with your foundation and some of the work you do there if we can. But I just want to go back to one of my other favorite stories, if I may, and thinking about how men and women can perhaps be competing for the same position. Could you share with us the story of you and Tony and school? And because I think that's a wonderful one. It really rings true of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, you see, here I am, this girl from Liverpool, but I turned out to be clever. And I was always the one, at the front of the class with my hand up. I knew the answer. So, and the nuns, because I went to a convent grammar school, and the nuns kind of taught us that, if we worked hard, we could achieve our dreams. Of course, ultimately, they expected us to then have the ultimate dream, which was to be a good Catholic mother. But nevertheless, they wanted us to stretch ourselves. And then I went to the LSE, and I found I was good at law, and I came top of the university. I got the top first in my year, and then I went to the bar and read for the bar, and I came top of England and Wales. So this is good. I must be good at it. And then I went for a job. And suddenly I discovered there was something that no one had ever told me. Because it didn't matter how good I was, there was a problem. And the problem was something I couldn't do anything about. And the problem was, in 1976, when I was called to the bar and I qualified, only 10% of the profession were women. And there were still plenty of people who thought women couldn't actually be advocates and stand and do trial advocacy. But anyway, and when I tried to find a job, people would literally say, and they, not just to me, but to others, we don't take women here because the clients don't like it. Or we're very, very liberal here. And so we have a woman, we couldn't possibly take another. What would happen if both of them got pregnant at the same time? The heavens would fall. But I did find somebody who would take me on and the idea is you do a year's apprenticeship, which we call pupillage. And at the end of the pupillage, because this chap didn't tell me it, well, he told me at the time that he had offered the job to somebody else. And lo and behold, when I turned up, that somebody else was still there. So there was me and there's somebody else competing for this post. And at the end of the year, he took me aside and said to me, Cherie, there's only one post here and there are 2 of you, and one's a boy and one's a girl. So obviously, I've got to go for the boy.
Incredible.
And obviously that was true, because that was the way things were. The fact that the boy, passed the bar exams but didn't come top, had a 2-1 degree, not a first, and he admitted himself that I was the better lawyer, made no difference whatsoever. And the irony of the whole thing was that within 7 years, that boy had actually left the legal profession and become a politician, because that boy was Tony Blair. And having beaten me, he also married me.
Now, I hope you have fun with this story still nowadays, but between you both.
He doesn't like
a wonderful
well,
story.
yeah, he quite finds it quite amusing. He's not quite. He will, to be fair, he will say yes. You were the better lawyer, but he still thinks that he was the more savvy, and he was the more savvy player. He had much more. You know, he came from a public school, a private school. He knew how to behave in these circles, which for a working class girl from Liverpool, really quite strange. I mean, I got used to it now, but at the time I was always putting my foot in it.
Yeah. It's amazing to think back in those days, you know, from my own time in England, only just a few years behind you. You know, I can remember it was more, I don't know if the word sexist is right, because I think it's what we knew at the time, it's how we were. And I think it's just, as you said, it was kind of obvious that you give it to the boy, which we look back now, we think that's ridiculous. But, you know, how much the British workspace has changed, and the American workspace here. And I'm thinking, what's the numbers in Parliament now? Is it 30? Is it a third of women?
It's coming up to a third. But you know, in 1997, when my husband became Prime Minister, it was the first time. There are approximately 650 MPs. It was the first time that the number of women MPs went over 100, and over 100 of those were actually from one party, the Labour Party. There were a handful from the other party, even though the Tory Party had a woman leader.
Yes.
And so it's not that long ago, and we're still only at a third. You know, so
which is higher than the US. I think we're at 23% for both.
I'm afraid that in the US, women's political participation is terribly low. Partly, I think, due to the amount of money that you have to spend to get into positions of power, and it's just tougher for women.
Right. Right, but you know, there are some. There's of course differences between the British and American system for getting into power. But one of the beauties of the American system, and you know, if I can call it that, is anyone can be president. I mean, it can be.
Well, so long as you're born in America.
Except for you and me. You and me excluded. For everyone else listening on this call, they could become, I'd imagine, president. And, you know, you can be a peanut farmer or an actor or a game show host or son or wife of the previous president. And whereas in the UK, that doesn't really follow through in the same way. And I don't know if that's good or bad. Part of me says it's great that anyone can be president, and part of me says it's horrifying that anyone can be president, because
I suppose it depends on the character of the president, but we won't go into that here. No, of course it's better. I mean, the most extraordinary thing is to think that there is a school in Britain called Eton, which is called a public school, but actually is a fee-paying school where the fees are more than most people in Britain earn in a year. And that has provided more prime ministers of the United Kingdom than any other school.
Yes.
And that means there's a very narrow class of candidates for prime minister. So the idea that there's a wider access to the chances of leading your country, I think, is a good thing about America. I mean, our current prime minister comes from Eton. His predecessor, but one, David Cameron, also was from Eton. So I'm not talking about the prime ministers from Eton in the 19th century or even the 20th century. I'm talking about the prime ministers of the 20th century. There have been, you know, 4 of them at the moment, and 2 of them came from Eton. And 3 of them came from private fee-paying schools, of which only 6% of our population go to. Only one, the woman, didn't.
Makes it a very narrow field. Yes, yes. Let's talk a little about entrepreneurship, if we can, because you know you became an entrepreneur in your own right, and now you've got the Cherie Blair Foundation, and you still are.
I still am. Look, as a lawyer here, as an advocate, we were all self-employed, so I was my own small business for a long time, and then since 2012, I've actually set up my own law practice where we practice in international and human rights law. So now I employ 15 people. It's only a small niche practice. So yeah, I know a bit about running my own business. And when it came, after we spent 10 years in this amazing, famous address, 10 Downing Street, and I had this front row seat on all sorts of things that were happening in the world, and I'd been able to travel the world. I wanted to do something, and I wanted to do something particularly for other women. And I identified women's ability to stand on their own feet and to get and control their own money as a real key to that. And so that's why the foundation concentrates on women's entrepreneurship. Because sometimes if the world of work isn't adapting to suit what you need, the best alternative is to set up your own business.
Totally.
Well,
totally.
Mike, you did that yourself, didn't you?
Well, I did, but that's because I don't think I was very employable was my problem. But we won't talk about me. That's a whole other story. So what unique challenges do women face as entrepreneurs? Particularly nowadays. I mean, is there still? I mean, of course, there is still, discrimination and stereotyping, but it's improved a lot. I mean, I'm in an entrepreneur chapter in Nashville, and I think we've got, I think it's like 25-30% of the chapter are women, and they continue to grow. And the last year's president of the chapter was a woman, and I think it's a pretty kind of everyone can play, or it seems it now. But
well, it's not. But it's not really true worldwide. In fact, across the world, there is no country where men and women actually do have absolutely equal chances to get to the top. But the World Economic Forum, which I'm sure people will have heard of, since 2006 has been producing something called the Global Gender Gap Report. And that report looks at whether men and women are having parity of opportunity. They don't look necessarily at the quality of the opportunities that are available to them, because they look at some poor countries where the standard of, for example, education isn't great for most people, but they look to see whether at least they're getting roughly the same chance. And they look in 4 areas: education, health, economic empowerment, and political power. And lo and behold, the gap is narrowing, sort of 9 to 10 in favor of men in health and education. But when you look at where the real power is in the world, if you look, for example, at political power, you're still under 30% women in political positions, whether it's local, national, or international, compared to men. And when you look at where the other big power center is, of course, the economy, money, it's still more like 6 to 10. And in fact, the tragedy is they published their latest report just at the end of last year. And they found that the gap was narrowing in 3 of the 4 areas. But when it came to women's equal opportunities, it had actually gone back. So they were measuring at the current rate of progress. They said it will take 255 years before women achieve equal chance to men in the economic field. And that was 55 years more than the previous year. So it actually had gone backward last year. Now, this year, I think it's likely to be worse, because one of the interesting issues about COVID, for example, is that though we know that men have suffered more health problems than women, the impact on the economy has fallen very heavily on women, and the adverse impact is being felt much more by women than men, for a number of reasons. One is that a lot of women, for example, are in the caring professions that are taking the burden of looking after people, and therefore the women actually are also more exposed to danger. A lot of women work part-time, and as the economy is shrinking, it's the part-time workers who are losing their jobs first. And then there's what we call the double caring responsibility, if you like. So women have to work, but they also tend to shoulder most of the burden of the housework and looking after children, and not to mention elderly relatives. And so for some women, working from home, particularly when the schools have closed, has become an almost impossible burden, getting up early to try and do your work, whilst at the same time trying to homeschool your children. there have been a number of women who just felt, I just can't take it any longer, and have fallen out of the workforce. And there have been a number of employers who have said, oh, these women aren't really committed because, her children's running about, and have felt someone's got to go. It has to be the girl.
Isn't
that's
that
not great.
awful to think it's 255-year gap at the current rate to catch up?
Well, look, I am a grandmother now, and I have a nearly 4 and a 6-week-year-old granddaughter. And it's not even in their lifetime. That's probably only in the lifetimes of their granddaughters. And that is absolutely not acceptable. And the terrible tragedy about that is, if women were more engaged in the economy, if we had more women entrepreneurs using their skills to set up jobs for others, then we would actually increase the world economy by a recent survey by $5 trillion. And women's economic equality doesn't just affect the economy, it actually has an impact on the health and education outcome for their children. It creates more prosperous societies, and of course diversity leads to better innovation and creativity. And yet the reality is, for every woman who does manage to start her own business, as I did, so many more are held back. They're held back firstly because of these terrible, pernicious assumptions about what women can and cannot do. We did a survey recently, some of the women entrepreneurs we work for, and asked them if they ever experienced discrimination. And over 70% of them talked about just sexual stereotypes. Things like, women can't manage money. Women aren't aggressive enough to run their own businesses. These are the sort of things that were being said to them. In some societies, there are actual legal barriers against women working. I mean, I can think some of the societies in the Middle East, they can't work without permission from the males in their families, for example. On top of that, if for so often you're told you're not good enough or you can't do things, it does have an impact on your confidence.
Yes.
And for many women, self-belief is a real difficulty. And then we find that when you get between boys and girls, families take an economic decision to educate their boys rather than their girls. So women often miss out on knowledge and skills training. And time again, we also see that when it comes to finances, whether it's bank loans or venture capital funding, a minute part of that goes to women. And, so many of the women we work with, the only way they get capital for their businesses is either through their savings or through family and friends. So there's a lot to be done. And what we try to do is by giving our business training, by giving access to networks, skills, mentoring, and also helping women form groups together to give themselves confidence so that they no longer feel they're the only person in the world doing this. Because sometimes, I knew what it was like myself in the 70s when I would go to a court and I'd be the only woman there, and most people thought I was a secretary. There are still plenty of places in the world where a woman is the first person to do a particular job. And that's a lonely place to be. So we try and build this community. One of our women called it sisterpreneurship, that we are together sisterpreneurs.
And which countries are you working? Where's most of your work going on, Cherie?
Well, we do a lot of work in Africa and in Asia, but we've also got some great programs at the moment in South America, Central America, and particularly Mexico. We do a different number of programs. One of the things we have is our global mentoring platform, and that is done on the web. And so we offer a year-long course where we train our mentors, men and women, to act as a listening ear and a help and a guide to a women entrepreneur. And because we offer that to organizations who are working with women entrepreneurs in the different countries, we're actually in over 100 countries, from Eastern Europe to Central Asia, to Vietnam, to Chile, to Africa, to India. So that means that we can say that we've been in over 100 countries. We've also reached 100 in the last 11 years since we started, 175,000 women.
Wow.
We've reached about 4,000 women with our mentoring platform, but we have these business apps. At the moment, we have an app called the Her Venture app, and we had an earlier version of that. And that has reached over 100,000 women in its different, it's because it's developed over time. And that's because it goes on the mobile phone, and it's designed for women who have got busy small businesses. And so it's training with gamification, with information in the local languages, and it's in 5 to 7 minute segments. So literally between customers in your hairdressing shop, while you're waiting for your child to pick up your child from school, these are courses that you can do to help give you those business skills and training, which don't always come naturally, and which make a big difference. And that allows us a huge reach. At the moment, we have that going on in Vietnam, in the Vietnamese language, in Indonesia, it's Bahasa, I think, or something like that.
Something like that, yes.
The Indonesian language, in Nigeria and Kenya in English, and in Mexico.
And give us the name of the app once again, so
it's called Her Venture.
For Her.
Her H-E-R Venture. Her Venture.
Thank you. And anyone can download that and use it.
Well, it was just available through our partnership, but because of what's happened with COVID, we have put a lot of our resource materials online now. So one of the things we learned when COVID happened was that the main thing our women entrepreneurs wanted to know was resilience. Now, how do I actually survive this? We did a survey, 93% of them anticipated they were suffering or anticipating to suffer, and only 4% of them actually thought that it could be good for their business, because there are some businesses that we know have done well out of this, and 40% of them thought that their businesses, at least temporarily, might have to stop. And so we rapidly put together, along with an organization called Cambridge Wireless and King's College London, a business resilience course, and it's a 90-day course, which is on the web. If you go to our website, www.cherieBlairFoundation.org, you'll see it, and it helps you make a plan to survive the big disruption that COVID represents to your business skills, and it's been very successful. So one example, for example, I talked about Vietnam. One of the women that we know of, who was actually originally on our mentoring platform, she had a business which essentially, she had 12 small little hostels, and it was advertised a lot on Airbnb, and it was geared to foreign tourists coming to Hanoi and wanting to experience life as not quite as the locals live it, but a nice place to live, but which was more authentic.
Sure.
Of course, COVID comes along, Vietnam closes down, Airbnb, no more.
Totally.
And so she looked at the resilience app, and she realized that actually there was another market in Vietnam, which was the more growing middle class in Vietnam from other parts of Vietnam, who actually wanted to come into the big city, who wanted to experience a bit more of the sort of modern Western type lifestyle. And so she was able to pivot and start advertising to them. And so she's managed to keep 70% occupancy in her 12 little houses, which is a lot better than some of the others. And so she was able to do that using this business resource resilience course. The other thing you'll find on our website, of course, is the women themselves telling their stories, because this is the amazing thing. What individuals, if you give them the tools, what they can do with them, way beyond your wildest dreams. And on our website, we have little videos of the women that we work with talking about what difference not only it's made to them and their business, but also what difference they have made in their local communities.
We're going to post the website address on the replay of this so people can see it as we're talking there. And it sounds like some wonderful...
I'd really love it if some of the people, I said it's men and women, if people would like to volunteer to be mentors, we're recruiting at the moment. It's a great opportunity. We ask you to give 2 hours a month. We'll train you in listening skills. We'll train you so you have a mentoring qualification, which allows you to help a woman on her journey. One of our women described her mentor as the invisible friend that walks beside me. We don't ask you to tell the women what to do or to solve their problems. What we ask you to do is to be the listening ear that helps them resolve their problems.
And this can be for men or women to sign up to mentor, or is it
absolutely? And no, definitely men as well as women. And it is more. We've got about 20% men. When we started in the pilot, we had 30% men, because it's very. Sometimes some of the women we work with haven't seen very supportive men, and it's good for them to know that not all men are against women. Not all men think that women are worthless. Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is, for example, one pairing we had, a chap in Birmingham had a factory paired with one of our mentees who was running a cafe in Nablus in the West Bank. And they were one of the early relationships. And they only met for the first time when they came over to actually New York to talk about that relationship. And the reality was that he as a man would never have been able to mentor her in person because they wouldn't have been allowed to be in the same room.
Right, of course.
But over the internet, he could. And she did extraordinarily well thanks to his help. He helped her set up her business, get a grant from the YMCA, and expand that business. So she took on 2 employees, and her business was she was a university student. She'd qualified in economics. But unlike the boys at that university in Nablus, most of whom went to the Gulf to work, as a single woman, she couldn't go. The Gulf wouldn't take a single woman. And so she was good at cooking, and she set up this cafe for the students, which was authentic, rather than McDonald's. It was authentic Palestinian cooking. We went back 18 months later to see what had happened, and she was no longer in the cafe because she had got a job using her economics degree in the Palestinian Authority. But her mother had taken over the cafe, and that was still going strong. So we regarded that as a double win.
Totally. Wonderful. One of the things that entrepreneurs have is drive, and what drives you with this nowadays? Because you've had a successful career, you've still got a successful career, you've been in 10 Downing Street, but you're still driven to do things. Where does that drive come from? What is it that keeps you motivated in the morning? And you're here at 9:45 at night in UK time, and very kindly giving your time to me and our guests listening. Thank you so much for doing that. I'd be asleep at that time of night. I have to go to bed at 9 o'clock, so I'm impressed.
I don't know, a belief that actually we're put on this planet to give something back. And I have been so fortunate. I mean, honestly, beyond my grandmother's wildest dreams. And I know that I'm not unique. I've just been lucky. And so if I can help some other people get the chances to be able to experience a bit of luck themselves, and that's an amazing thing to do. And that's why, we've got this campaign at the moment. We reached 175,000 women. We want to reach another 100,000 in the next 3 years. We've got to raise £10 million to do that, and we're already on track this year. So far, we've reached an extra 12,000 women, but we've got lined up. So this year we will reach 36,000 women. So that's, as you can see, a little bit over the third of our target, and we're hoping very much to exceed our target each year, and therefore bring the skills and the support network that the foundation provides to even more women. And the trickle down, the ripple effect from that is enormous. And I have to say thank you to the Americans, and because the US State Department and USAID have been great supporters of the foundation. And in fact, the program I was talking to you about in Vietnam and in Indonesia is supported by the USAID and by Qualcomm, which is the microchip that most Android phones have.
Yes.
So they understand the power of the mobile, and we are grateful for that. And another great American company, Bank of America, has been an amazing sponsor of our mentoring program. Every year they give us 100 of some of their best employees, and the financial skills that they have are so helpful to the women entrepreneurs. And ExxonMobil Foundation, again, another great American company, they've been sponsoring our work in Nigeria now for many, many years. So, we owe America a lot for the support that they have given us, and now also some support in Mexico and the programs that we're doing there.
Good. Hey, America's doing something right at last. I like it. Thank you.
Of course it is. America is still a great democracy, and it produces some amazing people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
So democracies only usually last a few hundred years, and some people say, is this the end of American democracy coming? Is that the sort of thing you might want to comment on, or would you rather pass on that one and we could talk about subjects like how do we make 40 years of marriage last, which I'm impressed with.
I don't believe. I mean, I believe in something. I mean, obviously, I was married to a politician. I joined the Labour Party at 16. I've been a political animal all my life. And there is something, I mean, America's about to have an election. You think, how can one individual vote make a difference? And yet there's something magical about the fact that every one of those individual votes do come together. And yes, they do change things. Governments change, presidents change, the character of governments change, and that's the combination of individual decisions. There's something magical about that. It's why the people we're seeing at the moment protesting in the streets because they feel that their election was taken from them, led by some amazing women.
Of course, yes.
So that fake president has been sworn in really in a shroud of secrecy, because the public know that wasn't he wasn't actually their choice.
Yes. 40 years of marriage. Did you want to give us a tip on that? I'm going to ask a second time because I think there's a lot of people that are going to want to know, how do you do that? What's the magic wand that you use for that one?
I think Tony's just a very tolerant person.
I like that. Thank you.
I think the priest at our marriage said, keep moving.
Keep moving.
Just keep
I like
moving together,
Yes. Yeah. Next 10 years for Cherie Blair, another book. You could become Prime Minister still. I mean, what about that one?
It's a tough job, and
bet, yeah.
especially at the moment, it's not. It's hard for anybody to do. But next 10 years, I've got 5 grandchildren now. A few more would be nice. The foundation, I want to see that going from strength to strength. And I still take such pleasure out of my legal practice. I still plead cases. I've just been doing one just recently. We've had to do it by Zoom, but it's an amazing privilege to be able to represent people, change their lives, contribute to the development of the law, which is one of the great joys of our common law system that we have in common here in the US and in the UK, that through individual cases you can change things. And we people will have heard that this week when they talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when they talk about the early cases she took for women's equality, and when they talk, as they mentioned today in the speech that the rabbi made, about her opinions, including her dissenting opinions, where she said that the dissenting opinion was not a negative. It was simply a a message to the future about what could be.
Yes, totally. Well, look, this is terrific. I appreciate you giving us your time, Cherie. I know you've got a family there, and you've got other things on.
I've got a husband who's probably going to say, "Why aren't you coming to bed?"
And there is the secret of the 40-year marriage. You're balancing these priorities. Thanks for giving us your time. I appreciate it. I hope
Mike, thank you.
And foundation as well.
It is, and thank you, because people should know that you made a generous donation to our foundation in order to lure me on this, and I really appreciate that, and I promise you that we will spend that money wisely.
Of course. Okay. Well, Cherie, and to all our guests that joined us today, thank you so much. Happy Friday. We got the day right. Friday.
Happy Friday.
Good night, Cherie. Thank you.
Good night.